Did Chaz Lanier turn a corner in his play against Wofford? Let's begin with Will. I saw a lot of jump shots. I don't know if he turned the corner or not, but he's sure seen more clutch than I ever dreamed. Will, your thoughts?
No, I think he had a hot hand and he hit shots, and he can do that also the way Wofford defended him, especially early. I thought that it allowed him to play in space. That's what he does, and why Chaz Lanier, you've seen, I think, ups and downs, is when you play in space, he's very comfortable with that. When you want to slow it down, half court, grind things out, I don't think he's as comfortable doing that. So I don't think he turned a corner last night. I think he had a team that defended him, especially early, in a way that played to his strengths. I thought that was the worst game I've seen Tennessee play since the Florida game. That was, and I'm talking about just the basic stuff, right? Like just the thing every basketball coach you've ever had in your entire life's told you to do, which is don't go off your man to double team and leave the open shooter. They did that. Don't forget about the corner three because you rotated over too quickly. That's I thought they left a million corner threes open. Wofford just didn't hit them. I thought, when the ball went up, how many times do you see a Tennessee player put a body on somebody when the ball was up? You didn't, right? And now they're good at crashing the boards, and that's okay. And they got to win because you're better than Wofford. But that was not a good performance. I didn't love that when Chaz hit a few early, and we had more than a few. When he hit a number of shots early, then what did you see? You saw him shooting over his defender instead of utilizing the ball screen and maybe getting a better looking shot when he started missing some. The game was never in doubt. You were never going to lose to Wofford. Man, you got to get it together. I just was, and I told you this yesterday, Dave, when you filled in on our show. Maybe the best thing for them is if they get a little bit of a scare, And so I think hopefully they got a little bit of a scare, but you got to play higher IQ basketball than that. This is you're too well coached. You're too good at players. Again, everything that your coach told you playing basketball from the fourth grade on, Tennessee just didn't do those things because they knew they could out-athlete them. And I thought Chaz Lanier defensively did not have a great game. I thought offensively, he had the hot hand early. And then I thought he took some really dumb shots instead of utilizing his ball screens, which would have created the space for him that he needed.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you say that, because I had a issue with the way Tennessee's defense played too, mostly because I had a parlay of Wofford not scoring 50 points and Tennessee covering the 23 points or the 17-point spread, 18-point spread. And if Tennessee bothered to stay on their man on the 3-point shots, I would have been right. But so I'm very angry with that. But as far as Chaz Lanier goes, can we give him credit on this? And I get what you're saying. He's more comfortable in space and things like that. But, I've seen all year Chaz Lanier really shrink in the biggest moments. It really stood out to me that, for instance, against Auburn in the regular season, Rick Barnes called the game-winning shot for Zakai Ziegler, not Chaz Lanier. The Kentucky game, the loss at home, I thought he just took himself out. There was a big issue with Texas where Rick Barnes dialed up a play for him and he passed up the shot. And then there's the Vanderbilt game where all he had to do was hit a free throw to send it to overtime, and he missed when the game was on the line. So all of that being said, I know it's against Wofford, terrible opponent, but this is his first NCAA tournament game ever. He never had one at North Florida. And he was willing to fire it up every time. Doesn't that count for something, that he was willing to do that, given the fact that he's been a little nervous in big moments throughout the year to do that?
Yeah, and I will say, to your point, I do believe there are times that he was not the guy that took the shot because there was a concern that if he missed it, he would not handle it well after the game. So I think that plays into your thesis there, and I think that part can be accurate. And I do give him credit for having more guts. I would also like him to use the brains a little bit, but you're right. He has grown a good bit as far as the amount of steel in his gut, but I would like to see him, like, he's a smart basketball player. Igor comes over to set the ball screen. Use the ball screen. Don't just shoot over your guy with Igor's guy, and Igor and your guy all right there in one space because you got the hot hand and you're feeling yourself. I'd just like to see him do those things. But you're right. He's gotten a lot more brave in the half court than he was even a month ago.
Well, I don't think he's turned the corner until he's consistently taking it to the rack and keeping all defenses honest.
I could see that. I would like to, and again, that part of that's utilizing your ball screen and making the right play, right? Or if you can take your man, like last night Wofford, you could take your man off the dribble, and he did not want to take his guy off the dribble. Now, sometimes I've said with this team, the worst thing that can happen to them is they hit a couple early threes, because then you know what I mean. Then they think they're the Golden State Warriors and they start splash. We're trying to splash for other it, but I don't know if he's ever going to be. I think in space, he is very comfortable doing that. In the non-conference, I thought he was comfortable doing that. And so when Tennessee would hurry up the floor, everybody gets immediately into their spacing, couple 2-3 passes, somebody drives the lane or somebody shoots an open three. I think Chaz Lanier is far more comfortable taking somebody off the dribble there. But when it's in the half court, the defense is compact in the paint. How many times do you see him when he drives do that pull up, fall away from the elbow, right? Like that, he's just not as comfortable ducking his head, getting to the basket, I think we knew he was this guy a little bit. Your hope then was, I've got a guy that averages 18 points a game coming from a mid-major that plays finesse. I've got a guy in Darlin Stone DeBar who will duck his head and just put his shoulder into anybody. And then Stone's dealt with some mental health issues, and you haven't had that yin and yang between those two guys.
Today's tough question, did Chaz Lanier turn the corner? Also our poll question, if you want to take an opportunity to vote on that. It is up. Vols win versus Wofford was dominant. Let's go. Just good enough or troublesome. We'll have Will's take on that. And also, we will have the results from the current poll that is running. As we remind you, today's tough question about Chaz Lanier brought to you by Banks & Jones, Tennessee's trial attorney, banksandjones.com.
Why Banks & Jones? Well, it's because they're Tennessee's trial attorney. You can play to win with Banks & Jones because they'll go to trial. You've heard of other lawyers. They say they'll go to trial and fight for you. They won't. They just want to settle. That's the easiest way out. Well, that's not Banks & Jones, led by T. Scott Jones. They won't settle. They'll go to trial for you. Tennessee's trial attorney. They play to win. Truly, Tennessee's trial attorney when it comes to criminal defense or personal injury. Why settle? It's Banks & Jones. T. Scott Jones. Banks & Jones.
Well, let's talk a little bit about whether or not it's turning a corner or clutch scene or not. And what do you think of the idea that, because we had Steve Hamer on the show, this was in the middle of February when we were really questioning Chaz Lanier's drop-off. I mean, through nobody's fault, there's a really good chance that he just wasn't adequately prepared for SEC play because this SEC is the deepest, most toughest conference, particularly defensively, that college basketball has ever seen. And on top of that, Tennessee's non-conference schedule ended up being a lot easier in November, December than I think they planned for it to be because a lot of teams ended up being significantly worse. So could Chaz Lanier's issues in January and February that we all kind of noticed, because I thought he kind of came on strong towards the end, could it have just been that he wasn't necessarily, that it was a bit shocking, not just for him, but for a lot of people, for the massive level of increase in competition from the SEC to non-conference play?
I think he and Igor have both struggled because of the change in play that Rick Barnes had to go through. And from what I've been told, you lost Estrella, you lost Carr, you had less depth, and also it plays back into maybe some old bad habits of Rick Barnes, right? Everybody talks about there's the second round Rick joke and stuff like that, which I believe is unfair. But why he loses early is because he's Mark Stoops or Kirk Ferentz basketball. It's I'm gonna, oh gosh, my defense is suffering because of how my offense is going. Pull this thing back. They had planned to play in space. They had planned to utilize a lot of things that looked a lot like what the Boston Celtics did last year. And we're going to hurry into our spacing immediately when we get into the half court, and couple passes. Somebody needs to be driving. Somebody needs to be shooting, space the floor, take guys off the dribble with the left or right hand. We have three guys that can do that on this roster. Akpara's a really nice defensive stopper, and it was going to look more like the NBA than college basketball. And then Estrella has the foot injury, and then Carr's gone, and Rick Barnes decides we're going to slow this thing down because we don't have as deep of a bench. I have made the argument. I have talked to many former coaches, players that have said, no, they need to go back to that. Yeah, you're 8 deep. Everybody's 8 deep. You know what I mean? Like Houston's only 7 deep, and you know what I mean? So it's not like Duke only goes 8 deep. So it's not like he had fewer players than everybody else, but I think he expected to have 9 guys and Stone to be that guy that when you got into the half court that could work with Zakai Ziegler, because games are going to get slowed down. And I think Chaz struggled and Igor have struggled because this isn't the thing that they do. It's like having Joe Burrow when you're running the triple option, right? I don't know how Joe. It doesn't mean Joe Burrow sucks. It just means this isn't what Joe Burrow does, and there's going to be a massive learning curve trying to figure that out. So you're playing to weaknesses, but you're playing to your coach's strength. And it's hard to argue with what Barnes' philosophy is there because you've been a top 5 team, top 8 team most of the year. You were the 12th ranked team in the preseason. So he's overachieved what the preseason expectations were for them. I just think, man, I'm looking at this team and I'm saying those two guys are so fish out of water. And the rest of your guys, like Zakai's just not a very good shooter. Meshek's not a very good shooter. Akpara's, not a very good put the back to the basket, get the ball in with the entry pass type guy. Because even if even if he can score, when the double team comes, I don't know that he's going to find the open man for the three to space the floor. I don't know if he's going to find that guy because I don't know what kind of passer he is. So I think these guys are just playing out of position and playing in a type of game. Again, do you remember Barry Switzer back in the day had Troy Aikman and was going to run the wishbone with him? That's what right now Tennessee basketball is doing offensively with Chaz Lanier and with Igor Milicic. It's just not the type of player they are. And they've adapted and they haven't complained to their benefit, to their credit. Because I'll be real, if I was Chaz Lanier's dad or Igor Milicic's dad, you'd probably I probably would have said some things to the media because I think it's a horrible decision. But it's working for Rick Barnes so far. It just the problem is, man, if you hurt those guys' potential for pro money by playing this way.
Yeah, if Chaz Lanier breaks his leg on Sunday against UCLA like Aikman did at Oklahoma, then it's Will West's fault, everyone.
Yeah, fair enough.
Okay, let me ask you the poll question as we change gears just a little bit, and then we're going to talk UCLA. Vols win versus Wofford was dominant. Let's go. Just good enough or troublesome?
Just good enough. Just good enough. And part of it's, I'm of the belief they were playing with their food, right? They knew we're such better athletes than these guys that I can leave my man to go try to double team and get a steal. I don't have to put a body into somebody because I'm a bigger, stronger, faster athlete and I can out jump them or beat them to the spot. So I think it was just good enough. And now, but if you look at it, look at the rest of college basketball. A lot of times I always want to say, okay, let's not just all focus in on Tennessee. Look at the rest of college basketball. Tennessee had the worst win for a 1 or 2 seed yesterday. So it was good enough. You won, but it was just good enough.
Thought it was troublesome, Caleb.
Yeah, I thought it was troublesome too. It's funny, you're right. They did have the worst win for a 1 or 2 seed. It reminds me of this is a totally random throwback, but y'all probably both remember this. 2005, the debacle of a season with Rick Clausen and Eric Ainge. You knew the season was in trouble the first week because Tennessee had a very ugly win against UAB, and the same week USC and Texas just blew out their opponents. And you're like, okay, so 1 and 2 blew out their opponents, 4 blows out their opponents, but 3, Tennessee just absolutely struggled to put away UAB, and then Fulmer acts like they would be a middle of the pack SEC team, which he was quoted as saying at the time. But this kind of reminds me of that. You're right, because it's like you saw every 1 and 2 seed dismantle their opponents, have no trouble, and you see Tennessee just get this sluggish win, could not put Wofford away.
I will say this really quickly, Will, because you and I were together. I thought the second ugliest win was Auburn. And if you look at the score, I heard somebody on the radio this morning say blew out Alabama State. That was kind of a game there, longer than it should have been.
Yeah, twice they blew double-digit leads for the same reason that Tennessee struggled against Wofford as they started playing with their food again. And they weren't fundamentally sound. They weren't doing all those things you've heard from every basketball coach at every basketball camp you've been to your entire life. They didn't do any of those things. Pat Summitt would not have been pleased with either of those performances because that's effort, right? Rebounding and defense, that's effort. And staying on your man, that's just focus. Putting a body into somebody, that's focus. They didn't do that. But I agree with you. But Auburn did eventually, once the second time that what it was, a 3? Was that what it was, Dave? Maybe Caleb, maybe you remember. The second time Alabama State closed it to 3, Auburn locked in and they did the job. Tennessee never had to completely lock in, so they kind of didn't lock in. Also, by the way, we're going to point out that center was my age. Like that guy, that center for Wofford is 44 years old, and wondering how he's going to pay for all his kid, and he and his wife are going to split up the kids' travel ball games that are coming up that weekend.
Well, I heard him and his wife are going through a divorce, actually. It's
so fair enough.
Situation. Yeah, and I noticed later in the game, too, I don't want to cast aspersions on Caucasians, but there were 3 white guys in the game at one point for Wofford. That's not a great sign.
Yeah, but at the same time, it was 3 white guys that couldn't hit open corner threes. So you got to feel pretty good about that if you're Tennessee.
I mean, it's like white guys that can't catch punt returns. It's like you're in there so you don't fumble.
There you go.